The desert wind howled against the jagged rocks, carrying with it whispers of an ancient prophecy long buried beneath the sands of time. Traders who crossed the barren paths spoke of a beast unlike any other, a creature marked not by legend alone, but by the decree of the divine. Some said it was the guardian of the earth, others claimed it would be the final sign before the world's end. No one knew when it would rise, but the fear of its emergence lingered like a shadow in every tale told by firelight. And when the hour came, no fortress, no king, no nation would stand untouched. This was not a myth to be ignored. It was a truth written in the unseen, waiting for its appointed moment to tear through the veil of certainty and confront mankind with what it had long denied. In the early days, when men still clung to the illusion that their cities and empires were unshakable, the earth itself began to tremble. The ground, once steady beneath their feet, quivered like a living thing. Farmers felt it first, as their plows struck soil that groaned beneath them. The merchants in the market towns heard the rumble echo through their streets, a sound like thunder, though the sky remained clear and cloudless. At first, they dismissed it as the shifting of the earth, a passing quake that would fade as quickly as it came. But the tremors did not leave. They returned stronger each time, as though the very bones of the world were restless. It was in one such village, cradled at the edge of a vast desert, that the whispers began to take form. The elders gathered under the fading light of dusk, their weathered faces marked by unease. They recalled words passed down from the generations before them, words that spoke of a beast born from the command of God, sent forth when mankind's arrogance had reached its peak. They said it would emerge from the depths of the earth, its form unlike anything seen before, and it would speak to the people with a voice none could deny. Children listened with wide eyes as the stories unfolded, their small hands clutching at the hems of their mothers' garments. The younger men scoffed, dismissing it as the ramblings of age, clinging to tales long outdated. Yet the unease in their voices betrayed them. Even those who laughed at the prophecy felt their hearts pound when the earth shook beneath their feet again. And then came the signs, small at first, but undeniable. Livestock fled from the plains without reason, their cries piercing the night. Birds scattered in frantic flocks, abandoning the skies that had always been their domain. Wells that once gave clear water turned murky, their depths disturbed by something unseen. The people prayed, hoping for relief, but their prayers seemed to vanish into the silence of the heavens. One night, beneath the light of a pale moon, a sound split the air, a deep, resonant crack that rolled across the desert like the roar of an unseen giant. The people awoke in terror, rushing into the streets, their faces pale in the silver glow. From the eastern edge of the land, where the rocks rose like broken teeth against the horizon, a fissure had torn open. Dust billowed upward, carrying with it a scent of sulfur and iron, heavy and choking. The ground quaked again, throwing men from their feet and toppling walls that had stood for generations. The elders fell to their knees, their voices trembling as they recited the words they had feared for so long. It has begun. Mothers clutched their children tighter, fathers looked on helplessly, and the once proud warriors of the village found their hands shaking upon the hilts of their blades. For what weapon could stand against the decree of the Almighty? The fissure widened with every passing hour, a wound in the earth that bled smoke and fire. From within came a sound unlike anything heard before. Not the roar of a beast, nor the cry of man, but a voice that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of all who heard it. It was not yet words, only a resonance, a warning carried on the trembling air. Yet even this was enough to strike terror deeper than any invading army or famine. That night, no one slept. The village huddled in fear, waiting for dawn, waiting for some sign that the nightmare would fade with the rising sun. But when morning came, the fissure remained, and the smoke rose higher, blotting out the clear skins. The people knew then that they were standing on the threshold of something far greater than themselves, something they could not flee or resist. The prophecy was no longer a tale, it was alive, unfolding before their eyes, and somewhere deep within the earth, the beast stirred. The fissure in the earth did not close. Days turned to weeks, and the wound only grew wider, stretching across the barren desert like a scar carved by the hand of fate itself. The villagers who lived nearest to it abandoned their homes, carrying what little they could as they fled toward distant lands. Yet wherever they went, they carried with them the dread of what they had seen. Fear spread faster than the caravans, whispered in hushed tones from one marketplace to another, until entire cities trembled at rumors of the earth opening to release something beyond comprehension. In the great city at the heart of the empire, scholars and priests gathered to debate the signs. Some claimed it was no more than a natural event, the trembling of the ground as it had done in ages past. Others reminded the assembly of prophecies long recorded in the sacred texts, warnings of a beast that would rise in the last days to mark humanity for what they had become. The arguments grew heated, and soon the rulers themselves took interest, sending envoys to witness the fissure for themselves. When the emissaries returned, their faces were pale and their words uncertain. They spoke of the smoke that rose day and night, of the stench that clung to their robes no matter how often they washed. But most disturbing was the sound, the low, resonant hum that emanated from deep within, shaking the very marrow of their bones. It was not a sound that could be ignored, nor one that could be explained away by science or reason. It was a presence, a voice without words, and it unsettled even the bravest among them. The rulers sought to calm the people, declaring that there was nothing to fear, that the fissure would close and life would return to normal. Yet their assurances rang hollow, for even as they spoke, tremors rattled the palace walls. Statues of their ancestors toppled, and cracks spread across the marble floors like spiderwebs. The people were not fooled. They knew something was coming. As the days passed, those who lived near the fissure began to report strange visions. Travelers swore they saw shapes moving in the smoke, vast and shifting, as though something stirred just beyond the veil of sight. Some said they heard whispers calling their names, voices familiar yet distant, like the echoes of lost loved ones. Others claimed they felt unseen hands brush against their skin, cold as stone. Fear turned to panic, and panic turned to chaos. Merchants refused to send caravans across the desert, fearing the wrath of what lay beneath. Farmers abandoned their fields, too afraid to work the land that trembled beneath their feet. Priests urged repentance, their sermons filled with fire and urgency, warning the people that this was the hour foretold by their forefathers. Yet even their voices wavered, for they too had heard the sound rising from the earth, and in their hearts they knew the truth. And then, without warning, the voice took form. It began as a rumble, deeper than thunder, rolling across the land. The fissure glowed with an otherworldly light, illuminating the desert in hues of crimson and gold. From its depths came a sound that was not a roar, nor a cry, but words, clear, resonant, undeniable. They were words spoken in the tongue of mankind, yet they carried a weight beyond mortal comprehension. The beast had not yet risen, but its message had begun. The voice declared what was hidden in the hearts of men, exposing their secrets with terrifying precision. A merchant who had cheated the poor fell to his knees as the voice spoke his name and unveiled his deceit. A ruler who had ordered the deaths of innocents trembled as the crimes he thought buried in silence were spoken aloud for all to hear. The earth itself bore witness, echoing each word so that none could deny it. No one was spared. The voice cut through every soul, laying bare the truth of what they had done. There was no escape, no hiding. Those who had prided themselves on righteousness found their hidden sins exposed. Those who had wallowed in corruption were dragged into the light. The people wailed and tore at their garments, for it was as if judgment had descended upon them while they still lived. Yet amid the terror, there were those who resisted. Some covered their ears, screaming against the voice, declaring it a trick, an illusion meant to control them. Others raised weapons, striking at the earth as though they could silence the fissure itself. But their defiance was in vain. The voice only grew louder, unyielding, unstoppable. It was not the cry of a tyrant, nor the whisper of a deceiver. It was a truth they could not escape, no matter how desperately they tried. The rulers, once proud and mighty, were reduced to trembling shadows of themselves. Their armies faltered, their palaces shook, and their commands went unheard. For who could obey a man when the very earth spoke with the authority of the unseen? And then came the first glimpse of the beast. From the depths of the fissure, a massive shape began to emerge. The people gathered at the edges of the desert, their hearts pounding, their bodies frozen between fear and awe. Smoke and fire billowed around it, obscuring its form, yet what little could be seen was enough to silence even the boldest voice. Its skin shimmered like molten metal, shifting between hues of gold and bronze, as though forged in the heart of the earth itself. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, piercing the darkness, fixing themselves upon mankind with a gaze that saw through every lie, every mask, every pretense. The ground shook with every movement as the beast clawed its way toward the surface. Its breath came in great gusts of heat, scorching the sand, turning it to glass beneath its weight. When it spoke again, its voice no longer rumbled from the fissure but resounded directly from its mouth, vast and resonant, echoing across the world. The words it spoke were not words of comfort nor of mercy. They were words of truth, a mirror held up to the souls of men. The beast did not come to destroy with fire or claw. It came to reveal, to strip away the illusions humanity had wrapped around itself. And as it spoke, the people realized that the prophecy was not about a monster that would devour flesh, but one that would devour lies. Still terror ruled the hearts of mankind, for though the beast bore no sword, its words cut deeper than any blade. Whole cities fell silent, their streets emptied, their people huddled in fear as the beast's voice carried on the wind, reaching even the farthest corners of the earth. Nations quarreled, rulers despaired, and the world held its breath. The beast had risen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The beast moved across the earth, its colossal form both magnificent and terrifying. Yet its presence was not like that of a predator chasing prey. It did not come to ravage cities or tear down fortresses, for such destruction was beneath its purpose. Wherever it stepped, the land itself seemed to quiver in submission, as though the soil recognized a command older than creation. Men, women, and children fled from its path, yet no one could truly escape it, for its voice carried farther than its body, reaching into the depths of every soul. It marked them one by one, not with weapons, but with truth. When its glowing eyes fell upon a person, something appeared on their skin, clear to all who looked, a sign that declared what they truly were. For the faithful, their foreheads glowed with a light, radiant and unmistakable, a symbol that could not be forged or hidden. For the corrupt, a mark of darkness appeared, staining them with the shame of their deeds. There was no argument, no denial, for the beast mark did not come from human judgment. It was the seal of the unseen, placed with a justice none could escape. Markets that once thrived on deceit collapsed overnight, for no merchant could disguise himself when his greed or honesty was laid bare on his brow. Courts became silent, for no judge could be bribed when his corruption glowed upon his face. The proud kings who had draped themselves in fine garments found their crowns meaningless, for their hidden sins were written upon them for the world to see. And among the common folk, those who had lived quiet lives of sincerity now shone with a brilliance that outshone gold, for their mark was of light. The world had changed, and society crumbled. Families turned against each other, for fathers bore the mark of corruption, while their children carried the sign of purity. Friends who had laughed together now looked upon each other with terror and shame, for one bore the glow of truth, while the other was shadowed in darkness. The beast did not need to strike them down with violence. Humanity was tearing itself apart under the weight of its own unveiled reality. Yet the beast was not without purpose beyond revelation. As it moved, it spoke words that pierced into the marrow of existence, words that echoed ancient warnings forgotten by men. It spoke of the arrogance of nations, of how empires had risen in defiance of the Jinn and fallen into ruin. It reminded them of prophets whose calls had been ignored, of scriptures abandoned and twisted to suit the desires of rulers and priests. Every word it uttered was a wound upon the pride of humanity, yet also a mirror that reflected the world as it truly was. In the great capital of the empire, where once the rulers had mocked the future and dismissed the fears of their people, the beast arrived. Its shadow swallowed the palace walls, and the gates of bronze melted as though they were no stronger than wax. The king, clothed in silks and trembling upon his throne, tried to speak, to command his guards, but the beast's gaze silenced him. Upon his forehead appeared the darkest of marks, so black that the torches dimmed beside it. The people, once fearful of his power, now spat upon his name, for they saw the truth carved into his flesh. His crown fell from his head, rolling across the marble floor, meaningless before the weight of divine justice. The beast moved on, and word of what had transpired spread faster than the wind. Nations trembled, rulers abandoned their thrones, and prophets of falsehood were silenced. Yet even as the world was torn apart, there were those who clung to hope. Among the faithful, the light of their mark gave them courage, and they gathered in secret places, whispering prayers that the end was near, that perhaps deliverance would follow this unveiling. But the unveiling was not yet complete. The beast turned its gaze toward the wilderness, where tribes had long lived far from the cities, untouched by the politics of kings. Even there the marks appeared, showing that no one could hide from truth, no matter how remote their dwelling. In villages of simple shepherds, those who had lived with honesty glowed with light, while those who had stolen or betrayed carried the stain of shadow. The revelation was universal, sparing no class, no people, no nation. Humanity stood stripped bare before itself. And then came the final march. The beast crossed mountains and rivers, deserts and seas, for the whole earth was its dominion. Its voice reached the ends of the world, shaking the hearts of kings and beggars alike. It spoke of the last hour, of the closing of time, of the moment when all illusions would be shattered and only truth would remain. Its words were not like the teachings of priests or the decrees of rulers. They were absolute, undeniable, as though the earth itself cried out through its tongue. In some cities, people fell to their knees, begging forgiveness. In others, mobs rose in rage, striking at one another in madness, unable to bear the weight of their marks. The faithful gathered, their hearts burning with both fear and hope, for they knew the beast's appearance was a sign of what was to come next. The corrupt hid in caves and fortresses, Yet their marks glowed in the dark, betraying them wherever they fled. The beast did not linger. It moved with relentless purpose, covering lands faster than armies could march. And wherever it passed, humanity found itself divided, not by wealth or by blood or by nation, but by truth itself. No weapon could strike it down. No army could resist it. For the beast was not of flesh and bone alone. It was a herald, a sign, a living decree. And as it completed its circuit of the world, the air grew heavy, the skies darkened, and even the stars seemed to tremble. The people realized that the beast's work was nearly done. It had revealed them to themselves, it had marked them beyond denial, and it had spoken the words of a truth older than the stones beneath their feet. What would come after, none could say, but all knew the world would never again return to the way it was before the beast emerged from the earth. The sky was no longer the same sky men had once looked upon with wonder. It had grown heavy, bruised with unnatural colors, and in its depths there lingered a sense of waiting, as though creation itself held its breath. The beast had completed its march across the lands, and humanity stood divided, branded, and shaken. But its departure was not the end. It was only a passage into what was destined to follow. Signs that had once seemed distant, almost the stuff of myth, now pressed upon every horizon, leaving no refuge for doubt. The faithful whispered to one another that the earth was moving swiftly toward its last hours, while the wicked, though marked and exposed, sank further into their rebellion, defying truth even as it consumed them. It began with the collapse of the order of the heavens. The sun, once the giver of life, faltered in its course, and shadows lengthened at strange hours, confusing the patterns by which men lived. Days bled into nights without rhythm, and crops withered in confusion. Animals roamed without instinct, bleating and howling at empty skies. Then, upon a day more silent than any before it, the people awoke to find the sun rising, not from the east as it had since the dawn of time, but from the west. Its ascent was slow, dreadful, as though the sky itself was tearing apart to allow such a reversal. Men fell upon their faces, weeping, for they knew this was the sign that had been promised, the irrevocable mark of the final seal. The faith of many wavered that day. Those who had borne the mark of corruption cried out in regret, begging forgiveness. But the door of repentance had closed with the rising of the sun from its forbidden side. No prayer, no sacrifice, no vow could erase their stain, for the time of mercy had been sealed, and judgment had begun its march. The faithful, their foreheads still aglow, bowed their heads in both terror and acceptance, for they understood that their trial was near its end. Chaos spread like fire. The nations that still stood collapsed into panic. Rulers cast down their crowns, and armies deserted their banners. The earth itself seemed restless, shaking with tremors that toppled towers and swallowed villages. Seas surged inland, devouring coastlines, as though the barriers that had once held them were crumbling under the weight of a greater decree. Yet amidst the ruin, strange rumors spread, whispers of a figure rising among the people, a man who claimed to offer salvation, who promised peace in a time of terror. His words soothed the fearful, his hands healed the sick, and his presence drew countless followers who were desperate for hope. He called himself a guide, a deliverer, one sent to restore what had been broken. To the masses, he was the answer to their despair, a beacon in the darkness. But those whose hearts had been shaped by faith recognized the truth behind his disguise. For this man was not a savior, but the great deceiver, the false Messiah whose coming had been foretold. His eyes glowed with a deceptive fire, and his words, though sweet, dripped with venom. He spoke of unity, of building a single world under his command, and those marked with darkness flocked to him eagerly, for his promises matched the desires already festering in their hearts. Yet even the faithful were tested by his presence, for his wonders shook their resolve. He commanded the skies and they obeyed. He made barren lands flourish, and he even called upon the dead, who rose at his word. Many faltered, believing that none could wield such power except one truly sent from above. But those who remembered the warnings of the prophet stood firm, repeating to themselves that deception would come clothed in miracles, and that the truest test was not in signs, but in allegiance to the one who was unseen yet eternal. The deceiver's reign spread swiftly, covering nations in submission. His armies grew vast, drawn not only from men, but from creatures and forces unknown, shadows that obeyed his command. With his rise, the world plunged deeper into darkness, and the faithful felt as though they were sparks struggling against a tempest. Yet even in the depth of despair, they whispered of hope, for they remembered the promise of a figure who would rise from among them, a leader who would carry the banner of truth against the tide of falsehood. From the lands of the East, amidst turmoil and oppression, that leader emerged, not clothed in splendor, nor accompanied by pomp, but humble, firm, and radiant with sincerity. His name spread in hushed tones at first, then with cries of joy, Al-Mahdi, the Guided One. He did not claim power through miracles or illusions, but through justice, through his unwavering submission to the truth, and through the strength of his character that drew hearts to him as surely as a flame draws moss. The faithful rallied to him, gathering in numbers that defied their oppression. He restored order where chaos had reigned, gave voice to the oppressed, and prepared his people for the greatest trial the earth had yet seen. It was not long before the deceiver turned his gaze upon him. He saw in the Mahdi the one obstacle to his dominion, the one figure who would not bend. War stirred like a storm upon the horizon, a war unlike any that had been fought before, for it would not be waged merely with swords and armies, but with the very souls of men. Alliances formed and broke, nations trembled, and the world braced for the clash of truth and deception. Yet even in those days of terror, whispers of hope grew stronger. For the faithful knew the Mahdi would not stand alone. The heavens themselves would answer in their appointed time, and one long awaited would descend to stand beside him. Their hearts trembled at the thought, not from fear but from awe, that they might live to witness what generations before them had only dreamed of. The return of the one who had been raised, the one whose breath would slay falsehood with ease, the one who would stand as the final defender of truth, Isa, son of Maryam. The days grew shorter, the signs multiplied, and the veil between the world of men and the unseen grew thinner with each passing moment. The beast had spoken, the sun had reversed, the deceiver had risen, and the Mahdi had come forth. All that remained was the final descent, the moment when the heavens themselves would split, and the last chapter of the Earth's story would begin to unfold.